Hello my friends, and warmest welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video I'm going to be painting a Fallout survivor from the Fallout Wasteland Warfare box set. That's quite a mouthful and it's taken me a few times to get that right. So as always, we're going to start with the skin, and I'm going to make this nice and quick. If you've watched me paint skin before, you can skip a little bit further ahead. If not, this is just a really quick introduction into how to do it, and if you'd want to learn how to do this particular set of skin tones, then you can check that out on one or two of my other videos. So yeah, just check out some of the other videos if you want to know how to do the skin tone a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to start with the bellow beige red. This is a nice, quick and easy way of building up those skin tones and building up those skin colors, which is really nice and smooth and fast. So we're just going to use our beige red as a base. Then we're going to use a flesh tone from the army painter just to create a little bit of a shadowing in the recesses, just under the eyes and around the mouth and in between the fingers. Then we're going to go back to the beige red and build our color back up again. And then once we've built that color back up, we're then going to use that beige red and a basic skin tone just to build a first stage highlight. Now I tend to do sort of 3 or 4 different sort of highlights when I'm painting the skin, and this creates a little bit more depth and a little bit more sort of tone, especially in this particular sort of painting style, or in this particular sort of cartoony kind of effect that I tend to paint. And each one of these steps does make a really good difference to it. So once you've used the beige red and the basic skin tone sort of about a half and half, then we're just going to go to the basic skin tone on its own. We're just going to pick out some of the more extreme highlights across the forehead, across the nose, things like that. There's a little bit of detail and a little bit of depth in the face on this particular model, but there's not loads, so you kind of have to make up a little bit as you're going along. So I tend to try to catch as much of the highlights across like the cheeks, the nose, the forehead, just around the mouth and things like that, and just kind of build that character. And then for the final highlight, I'm just going to use the basic skin tone mixed in with a little bit of the light flesh. And this is just going to create another step up, just that next level of highlighting on the face and on the hands. So this is just a basic, as I said, just a nice basic, quick and easy, cool way of painting simple skin that has a really cool looking effect to it. So yeah. Now once we've done that, we're going to move on to part 2, and part 2 is all about putting the base colours onto the model. So we're going to start with one of the most vibrant, or one of the most sort of standout parts to the model, the part that like kind of takes over most of the model, and that is by using the jumpsuit. So we're going to paint this using a bellow medium blue, and this is a really cool blue, because this blue is, not only is it already quite vibrant, but as we build this up, we're going to get a really nice, vibrant, bright colour blue out of this this colour. And on this model particularly, it's going to stand out and make it look truly stunning. So this is kind of what we want. This is what's going to give it the real nice sort of Fallout effect and feel to it. Now, just across the Pip-Boy here on the left wrist, we're just going to paint that using a US olive drab. And then we're going to move on to use one of my favourite colours, which is a dark rust. Dark rust is a really good dark brown colour. This is a really good base colour to build up other colours on top. So I tend to use this quite a lot for things like hair or leathers and things like that. So as you can see, I'm just using this across the butt of the gun, just the same as I have done across the hair. But what we're going to do when we come across these bits later, we're going to paint them in different browns so that it catches your eye slightly differently. Now, I'm using a little bit of a mixture of different colours. I like to mix up my paints and use different paints for different things. So I've bought and I'm trying some different paints by using some of these AK Interactive sets. And with these sets, most of the time in the box, they come with a really good sort of base colour to begin with. So for the leathers on this particular model, I'm basing everything in this tenebrous grey. And this is a really dark grey colour. It's almost black. But these paints, when they dry down, this has a really cool sort of like kind of like a really nice matte effect. So this becomes almost like a base coat. So say if you were to spray your model black, this has a really good sort of base coat that you can build up from. So this is what we're doing. We're just going to do everything that's going to be in the leather in this colour first, and then we'll build up from there. Now, sticking with our AK Interactive, I'm doing the straps just across the butt of the gun using a light earth colour. If you followed some of my other videos, normally for this type of thing I would probably use a bone white. And this is a similar sort of colour, so there's giving you choice there. You can use either an AK Interactive, or you can stick to the Vallejo and use the tried and tested sort of bone white colour as well. So sticking with the Vallejo, or going back to the Vallejo rather, we're just going to use gunmetal just across some of the silver bits. So we're going to go with a true metallic metal on this particular model, but we will rough that up a little bit later and make it look a little bit more dirty and worn, being as this is Fallout and it's supposed to be sort of a post-apocalyptic kind of miniature for that type of game. We're going to make it look a little bit grimy and dirty and beaten up a little bit later. So yeah, just paint in the two weapons, so the rifle just across the back and the pistol just held in the hand there as well. Now this is the most tricky bit that I found, and this was painting the little yellow part. So there's a small collar, a small bit just across the front here, and you can see just the tips of the numbers from Vault 111 just across the back here. So I was using a sun yellow to base these, and this was probably the more difficult bit. This was the thing that I found probably the hardest to get the brush into. So take your time with this, because it will be a little bit sort of tricky on times, but yeah, you can get there. Stick with it, a little bit of patience, have fun with it. Now once all of those colours are done, we're going to just quickly cover everything apart from the skin in a wash. So I'm using the Citadel Null Oil for this. This is a black wash. This will tone the colours slightly, but we're going to build those colours back up, and the model is going to look really, really good for it. So yeah, just using this Null Oil wash just to get across all of those areas where the blue is, where that US Olive Drab and all things like that. So there we go. Once the shaders dried down, then we're going to look at rebuilding those colours back up and getting this model to really, really look as good as it can. So we're going to start by using the medium blue again, and we're going to start to build up the overalls. So we're going to start to build up this nice blue one piece. So what we're going to try and do is we're just going to try and follow the folds as much as possible and stick to the dynamic pose of the model. So as you can see, there'll be a lot of folds across like the back of the knees and just around sort of the leg areas where the model is standing. And what I'm doing is I'm just painting across using the very tip of the brush. What I tend to do when I'm painting a lot like this is it doesn't matter to me too much that we leave in sort of like brush strokes and things like that, because by doing so we're actually creating a little bit more sort of character and folds and dynamism to the model itself. So as you can see, by using those brush strokes we're actually building sort of character through the way that the model is standing and the pose and things like that. So we're not worried too much about getting everything exact or perfect. You can spend a bit more time on sort of blending and things like that if you like, if that's sort of your cup of tea. But it's completely up to you how you want to sort of paint these things through. Myself, I tend to like using those brush strokes to create that depth, as I say. So as you can see, just around the front here, where all of the overalls and the one-piece suit, as you can see, there's a lot of folds there. So I'm just using the tip of the brush to sort of build these folds up, leaving a little bit of that darker color just below. And the cool thing by using, as I normally say, the cool thing by using sort of these thin paints is that it's going to blend a lot more naturally into the model, which is going to create a little bit more of sort of a natural sort of effect, which means it's going to be more pleasing on the eye. So when you're looking at the model later, it's not going to look too out of place with these little highlights and things like that. It's actually going to look a little bit more normal and a little bit more toned down than how you'd expect it to look. So once the first layer is dry, what I'm actually doing then is I'm just going to add a small bit of dead white into medium blue. And dead white is one of my favourite sort of colours that I mix. Dead white is a great colour because it increases vibrancy to the colours underneath. And it also puts them up a stop, so it makes them a little bit brighter. So you can create sort of like a little bit of a highlight onto those folds. The only thing with dead white is by using a little bit too much you can sometimes change the colour of the base colour, so you don't want to use too much on this, because if you use too much dead white on this medium blue, that blue then tones up too much and it looks a little bit too over the top. So you just want to use a very small amount. Now for me, I would say sort of like 10% to begin with, something like that. So probably use about I don't know, sort of like 4 blobs to 1, you know, like a 25%, and see how you go from there. And just use small little bits and increase it in small increments until you're happy with the shade. Don't put too much in, as I say, because it can change the overall sort of colour and the overall sort of effect of the paint, and then you kind of lose the kind of effect that you're looking for. So just a small amount at first and build up from there, and kind of build up to where you feel a little bit comfortable. As I normally say, they're your miniatures, so you can paint them however you like, but this is sort of the way that I've built up that vibrancy across this particular model. And as you can see, by using those brush strokes to create the folds in the blue, it's kind of creating that element of depth now, which is really, really nice. We're going to do something similar with the hair. So normally you'd be sort of like tempted to just dry brush hair. I tend not to dry brush hair as much as possible, just because I try to make it look a little bit more sort of like hand painted. And we're doing the same thing here. We're just using that dark rust, so that original dark colour, and we're just mixing a small bit of leather brown from Vallejo into it as well. I'm just trying to paint the raised areas as much as I can, while leaving that original dark rust darker colour, and of course the shade as well from the Null Oil in the darker area. And you can see on the hair that there are areas of the hair that are sticking out, some of the raised points, and that's all we're doing, is we're just painting those raised areas up, so that then it's catching the colour, and the colour will catch the light, and again it looks a little bit more natural, and the tones look quite nice. We're going to do the same thing again. This time we're only just going to use the leather brown on its own. So we've used the dark rust originally as the base, then we've used dark rust and leather brown as a mixture for a medium, and then we're just going to use our leather brown then on its own just as a highlight. We're going to try and catch mostly now just the higher raised points, and leave in sort of the darker areas in those recesses. Again, using the tip of the brush and using the brush strokes to kind of create the depth and create the element of depth in the model as well. And as I say, you could sort of dry brush the hair if you want, but just spending a little bit of extra time and just painting all of these little hairs and things like that kind of makes your model stand out a little bit, and it's a little bit more sort of controlled as well. Sometimes with the dry brushing you can lose a little bit of control, and you can get a bit of paint, you know, kind of where you don't want it or anything like that. So once the hair is done, as I was saying originally, we used the dark rust base coat on the handle of the gun, on sort of the stock here, and on the hair, but we're going to use two different browns so that it kind of separates, it makes it a bit nicer to look at. You don't want everything looking the same brown and things like that. You want to kind of have a few different browns so that it separates those colours. So we're just using a flat earth for this, and we're just using this across sort of the stock of the gun, and just across the sort of forward grip here, sort of the long barrel point as well. And like I say, mixing these different browns together on this model is going to create a little bit more character. It's going to give your eye more to look at than just looking at the same sort of brown all the way through. And that's always a good idea, is to try to mix those colours, to not mix them together, but to try to mix colours up on your model so that it gives you more to look at. So once that flat earth is dry, we're then going to paint beige brown, which is a really nice natural highlight to that flat earth colour. And again, using the tip of the brush, we're just using sort of like scratches and things like that. And this is creating a little bit of more of like a worn out sort of effect to the wood as well, because this is, like I said earlier, a post-apocalyptic game. The gun isn't going to look perfect, the wood isn't going to be perfect and things like that. So you kind of want things to be a little bit scratchy and a little bit worn. And the same thing with these bandages, we're going back to the original colours, we're just going back to that light earth colour and just trying to use the brush, the very tip, just to create these little scratches so that it looks like this cloth is a little bit worn and there's a little bit more depth to the cloth, so it's not just one flat colour, as you can see. And we're going to try and do that around the whole bandage, so on both sides and right the way around as it wraps around the stock here, as it wraps around sort of the back of the gun. And then we're going to use the AK sets, so we're going to use some different paints, and we're going to paint then the rest of the leathers. Now, as I was saying about keeping your browns different, by the time we get these leathers set up, we would have about 3 different sort of tones of brown on this model, and again, that's breaking up those browns. So although there's a lot of brown on you, it's not all one colour, so it kind of separates it, making it a little bit easier to look at and a little bit more pleasing on the eye. So for this one, we're using leather brown. This isn't like the Vallejo leather brown. Vallejo leather brown is a much lighter colour. This AK Interactive is a very sort of it's an interesting colour. It's a little bit more like the dark rust, but a lighter shade. And pretty much I'm just going across where we've used that sort of really dark grey. I'm just going to paint this across first. So this is our first board, sort of our first layer up. Now you don't have to be precise with this because of the darkness and the really black sort of dark grey underneath. What we're going to do is it's going to create a element of depth by having the darker areas where the folds are in the pockets, the pouches, across sort of where the shoulder pads meet. You don't want to paint into those bits so that it kind of gives that depth without you sort of needing too much to go in and shade everything and things like that again. So once we've used that leather, we're just then going to use that leather brown and a deep brown. And deep brown is a intense color, so AK they do an intense range, or they do different colors have like an intensity rating, so they give you this kind of it says on the bottle that this is quite intense, and what that's going to do is it's going to boost that vibrancy. So by mixing the leather brown and the deep brown together, what you're actually getting is you're going to get a really nice intense sort of like stop up, so that's giving you a nice boost of vibrance and a nice boost of color on top. So as you can see with the pockets, the pouches and things like that, you can see just how much that deep brown's intensity has sort of brought that colour through. And again, by mixing those sort of browns together, we've got something that looks, obviously different kinds of browns and things like that kind of create different effects. So the leather on the shoulder pads looks a little bit more like it could be a worn leather. The wood grain now on the stock looks a little bit more wooden and things because these colours are different. So that intense deep brown that I was saying, what we're going to do now is we're just going to pick that one on its own. So whereas we use the leather brown, then the leather brown and deep brown mixed together, now we're going to use that deep brown. We're just going to create like scratches and little worn little bits. We're just going to use like sort of stippling effects and scraping effects and things like that. With this paint being nice and thin as well, this is going to use and sort of build that intensity and build that sort of vibrancy up. But we're also going to make it so that those little scratches and things just sort of catch your eye and throw you off so that it doesn't look like it's just one flat colour. Again, create into that depth, create into that element of a worn out, sort of battered, worn leather. There's not everything, especially in a post-apocalyptic world, is going to be smooth and perfectly blended and things like that. So as I said earlier, this is probably the hardest bit. This is only going to be a quick little bit for me showing you that I'm just getting in there, because obviously you can make mistakes as I've just done there. Just trying to get that yellow back in on the collar. It is very, very fiddly, so try to take your time. And then once you've got into the yellow bits, it's just a case then of building up that olive drab. So just using the US olive drab just to run the Pip-Boy here. US olive drab seemed like one of the more logical choices for me, because that would be sort of a colour that the US would be using sort of in the 1950s and things like that, for things like tanks or military uniform and things like that. So I think that sort of colour suits the Pip-Boy perfectly well. And then once you've done the olive drab back, it's just a case of just popping a little bit of bone white in there and just trying to catch the edges as much as possible. You can be as scratchy as you want with this, again, because it makes it look worn and it makes it look like the paint has had a little bit of a beat in and the paint is chipping in some ways and things like that. And I tried to get a little bit creative here. This is really hard because it's a very, very tiny screen, but I'm just using a small bit of livery green or livery green, and this is a very, very vibrant light green. And so all I've tried to do is just put a couple of dots and maybe a line just in there, just to create a, like, almost look like there's something actually going on with the Pip-Boy, as if like the screen is showing off a little bit of the display on there. And then I'm just using the gunmetal, just going back to this gunmetal colour that we used originally, and I'm just painting a very, very, very light dry brush. So when I say very, very light, I mean it is very, very light. There's barely any paint on the brush, and I'm using a very thin brush to use here as a dry brush, just so that I've got control over it. And then I'm going to do the same again with just the silver on its own. So we've used the gunmetal, now we're just using the silver. We're just trying to catch some of the raised areas, but we're trying our best not to get this dry brush on any of the work that we've done. And then as one of the final stages, which is something that is completely optional, what I'm using here is I've got this really cool paint called a medium rust deposit. And that's all you do, is you just get a very small amount of this on your brush, and then you can just dab this using sort of a stippling effect, and this will create like a rusty, worn out, sort of dirty look to your weapons and things like that as well. And there you go, once she's all done, this is my lone survivor, this is her all painted up. The blue pops absolutely beautiful on this model. It's a really cool colour, and it really stands out on this. I particularly like the way the wood grain on the butt of the rifle has come out, and it's really cool to have those mixed sort of browns so that it gives you something different to look at. All in all, I think this was quite a cool little paint job. You'll have to let me know in the comments below what you think and if you like it. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for tuning in, for watching. Thank you for your comments. And just, you guys are awesome. Thank you.